Hello and welcome. Our webinar is Education and Leadership, Bringing History to Life. It's nice to be here together.
Oh, yeah.
Great to be here.
We are gathered here in Washington, D.C., across from the Ford's Theater in the Lincoln Center for Education and Leadership. While our participants are continuing to log in, let me give us a little tour of the control panel so that we can all make sure we take advantage of being together in this webinar. Teachers, on your screen, you have a webinar now GoToWebinar control panel. The menu has a plus sign next to each item. If you'd like to open the item, just click on the plus sign and the field will open. The one you may want to open now is the chat feature. You can use chat to post questions and comments for the group. You can also open the questions field if you'd like to ask a question that just comes privately to us, your group today. So here we go. Let's take a look at our webinar team. Now that we've taken ourselves into this century with technology, let's hop back in time. We have a combination of Ford's Theater and WorldStrides working together today. I'm joined by Sarah Jenks. Sarah, you're the Director of Education Programming. Tell us about that.
Well, for 7 years now, Ford's Theater has had a full education department. I started 7 years ago in July.
Congratulations.
And we are now a team of about 6 people working together to bring Lincoln's legacy to life and to commemorate Abraham Lincoln's assassination and death here. In my previous life, I was a middle school teacher.
Yay!
And history, English, and drama. So I'm thrilled to be working with teachers at every chance I get, and I'm just excited to be here today with all of you.
That's great. Sarah from Ford's Theater is joined by Jake Flack, the Associate Director of Museum Education. Jake, welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here today. As Wendy mentioned, I am the Associate Director of Museum Education, and like Sarah, I was at one time a middle school history teacher, so I'm overjoyed to be working with teachers today, and much of what I do actually is summer professional development program that we have here in Washington for teachers, which we'll explain a little bit more about later in the session.
The experience that you guys have really lends credibility to the programs that you're running. You understand the needs of the teachers that work with you. Terrific.
Yes.
Very true.
Yes.
So Ford's Theater and WorldStrides partner together. My name is Wendy Amato. I'm the Director of Education at WorldStrides.
And I'm Catherine Taylor, the Associate Director of Education at WorldStrides.
Both of our organizations have educational goals, and our educational goals actually mirror the webinar goals, which makes it really exciting to be together here in D.C. with you. Our shared goal today is to provide access to resources and experiences that ultimately enhance student learning. So as we know, we're all teachers actually, and we are working to meet the needs of teachers in order to meet the needs of students.
That's right.
Absolutely.
We know how
Perfect
important
resource.
it is for professional development to be authentic and engaging so that teachers can be ready to teach their students.
That's great. A community of educators and a nice team today. Perfect. So here we are. We're at Ford's Theater. Can you tell us, Jake, a little bit about the programming that you all offer?
Absolutely. So Ford's Theater's focus and mission is to explore the leadership and legacy of Abraham Lincoln through performance and through primary source analysis. So we spend a lot of time looking at Lincoln's words, and we also spend a lot of time sort of looking at Washington and what it was like during the Civil War and using Washington sort of as a microcosm for the rest of the country during the war.
When you say primary resources or primary sources, I get excited because I know from classroom experience how hard it is to be a teacher alone in the classroom trying to choose materials that will benefit the students.
Absolutely. We use everything from Lincoln's actual speeches to photographs to maps, and actually we use Ford's Theater itself as a primary source. So, the actual building, the place is the primary source where our story happened.
Thank you for that. Thank you for authenticating. In this world of easy access to information, it's nice to know that you guys are ensuring that we have quality resources for our students. Let's take a look at some. You've chosen some for us today.
Absolutely. So I'm just going to sort of outline what a visit to Ford's Theater may entail. And also we're going to spend some time today talking about resources that we have available for those teachers that are not able to come to Washington but who are able to connect with us either through our distance learning initiatives or just through our website.
Yeah, you all do a lot.
We have a lot of things to offer, for those not able to come. But if you are fortunate enough to come with your students, the way that our site, we call it the 10th Street campus because we are larger than just the building of Ford's Theater. We break it into what we call 4 acts. So the image that you see on screen is Ford's Theater today. There's a group waiting to come in through the door on the left.
We're in Act 1 of this theater analogy.
We're getting there. We're tearing tickets in line.
Okay.
Yeah, at the box office, as it were.
If we go to if we move first to the Basement Museum, which is Act 1. And Act 1 is the story of Lincoln's presidency. So in the Basement Museum, which was completely redesigned in 2009, traces sort of the history of Lincoln's presidency and his time in Washington. There are tons of primary source images. There are a lot of interactive. Students are encouraged to touch life-size statues of the conspirators. There's a great section on Lincoln as a father and a family man, so you get that special look inside of life in the White House and what it was like for his children specifically. And then, of course, this image that you see on screen is the entrance into the Surratt boarding house, which tells the story of the conspirators.
I've accompanied WorldStrides student groups here, and I can say firsthand that when you walk into this space with students, they are drawn to the resources and they are engaged, and it feels fantastic bringing students here and watching them almost learn by accident.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. Yeah, we just encourage as much hands-on experience and interaction as possible. After you leave the Basement Museum,
This is beautiful.
you go up into the theater, and depending on, we're a timed entry site, so depending on what your timed entry tickets are, a visit either starts in the Basement Museum or directly in the theater. And in the theater, one of 2 things usually happens. One, and the most common, is a National Park Ranger gives a talk from the stage describing the events of the assassination and the history of the
And
theater.
your guests are seated as
Guests are seated.
theater attendees?
Just like they would have been.
Just like they would have been, but we are still a working theater. We put on 4 major productions a year, and so there are times throughout the year when the theater is either closed or partially closed for rehearsals or set building or something. And in some cases, you'll see on our on our website schedule a theater walkthrough. So what this entails is actually going up into the balcony. But there is no ranger presentation at that point.
Wow.
And then if you're really lucky and you were here in the spring in the morning, you get to see One Destiny, which is a short play, a historical theater presentation commissioned that tells the story of the assassination through the eyes of people who were working at the theater that night, including Harry Ford and Harry Hawk, the actor who was on stage when the shot took place.
Wow.
So that's a really, really
Great
special
perspectives.
opportunity, and it combines the theatrical with the historical in a way that we're really proud of and excited about. So
And I think
it's
fantastic.
it also really allows students to assume different points of view, which we'll talk about in other things
Yeah,
today.
we
But
know it's important.
It is.
yeah, so they're seeing basically about 10 or 11 characters who were there the day of the assassination and all of their sort of recollection on what they saw that day. And is there something I could have done to stop this?
It's not the way we usually think about the
Right.
assassination.
It's a whole new thing. It's a total immersion, incredible engagement.
Yes, it is. And then, of course, the highlight of the theater is the theater box where President Lincoln was seated when he was shot by John Wilkes Booth along with his wife and their guests. And the box is perfectly preserved, and it doesn't, throughout any play that we have on stage, the one rule about Ford's Theater is they're not allowed to obscure the box. So the box is visible 364 days a year, right? Close to Christmas.
3, I think. Now Thanksgiving too.
Thanksgiving and
all right.
Christmas.
But
Any other day,
Available.
any other time.
Very accessible.
so I know you all are responsible for much more than the theater itself. We've seen a little bit here, but you have quite a lot going on.
That's right. So after you leave the theater, you have the opportunity to engage with Act 3, which tells the story of Lincoln's death. And I'm sure, as most people know, Lincoln actually was carried out of Ford's Theater across the street and into a boarding house, and he passed away in this house, the Petersen boarding house. This is an image taken from the actual, what's called the death room, where Lincoln was brought right down this hallway. And it's a very powerful place to visit, because not only do you get a sense of the enormity of what happened, but you also sort of get a window into what it was like to maybe live in downtown Washington in the 1860s. This was just a very average boarding house that people would rent bedrooms in, and all of a sudden, one of the catastrophic events of American history is taking place in this house.
Yeah.
And the amazing thing about the house and the experience you'll have in there is that it wasn't just the back bedroom where something was happening. In the back parlor, Secretary of War Edwin Stanton was interviewing witnesses, and in the front parlor, Mary Lincoln sat and wept with some friends that she had called to her side to be with her during this difficult time. And even outside, even if you're standing in line outside waiting to go into the Petersen House, you can imagine what it must have been like to be a regular person, either having come out of the theater or rushing to Ford's Theater on 10th Street from somewhere else in the city when you heard of this event.
Hearing the news. Yeah.
Yes.
Because, it was almost 12 hours. It was about 9.5 hours that everyone waited to find out what was happening to President Lincoln.
They weren't sending text messages about
No,
this,
no,
were they?
They were
No,
quite
no.
literally hearing the news.
So
That's right.
people were gathering right here
That's right.
outside of the building where we are right now.
One of the most powerful things I always experience is standing in the middle of 10th Street just thinking, don't get run over by a car. But just if you stand on the sidewalk and you think, what must it have been like to be standing out here all night waiting
Mm-hmm.
to hear news throughout the night of what was happening inside the Petersen House.
So as part of a Ford's Theater visit, you have the opportunity to walk across the street and also tour.
Exactly.
And
You go
follow
up
the footsteps.
You literally follow in the footsteps of those that carried the president across the street. And the experience used to end there, and then as of a few years ago, excuse me, actually in 2009, just 2012, we opened another building across the street next to the Petersen House called the Center for Education and Leadership,
Mhm.
which is where we're taping this
Yes.
from today. And this offers 3 more floors of exhibit space that examine the aftermath of the assassination, and then takes a really close look on Lincoln's legacy. Here we see an image from the 4th floor. It's actually the aftermath gallery is showing the funeral train that was planned to take Lincoln back to Springfield, and the public funerals that were held, and just sort of the massive outpouring that was shown at these funerals, with literally hundreds of thousands of people coming out.
And
in
really
these
the
various
first of
cities.
its kind, if I've understood.
First of its
what
kind,
you taught me.
really sort of the first national funeral, and this sense of national mourning. But here we see a picture of the end of the floor. This is Booth hanging out or hiding out in the tobacco barn where he was eventually caught. And students are able to get up right next to the barn and look through the slats, and there's an audio presentation of soldiers banging on the barn, ordering him to come out. And then they light the barn on fire, and then you hear the shot that eventually kills Booth, fired by the Union Sergeant Boston Corbett, and there's a nice little bio of him pictured right there as well.
Well, this is not a set of just photographs up on a wall where you stroll by and
No,
No.
take it or leave it.
No, no,
This
there-
is engaging.
There are
There is-
touch
yeah.
screens, and you're hearing things, and it's great.
Well, and right behind, you can see that there's a really wall-sized map that shows the entire path that John Wilkes Booth took from Ford's Theater down into Virginia, where he was eventually captured. But it gives a great sense of what that pathway looked like and what country he traveled in his flight.
I think one of the things that's impressive too is that the way information is presented here appeals to all types of learners. So as a teacher, when I think about bringing my students to Ford's Theater, I'm not just offering a gift to the students that are very history-minded, but this is there is really something for all disciplines and all interests. It's very rich.
Absolutely. From there, you walk down a staircase into the Legacy Gallery, which is a gallery that explores Lincoln's impact as a leader, both on future American leaders, specifically American presidents, but also on world leaders. And it's also a way that we remember him in pop culture and, as on formal memorials like the Lincoln Memorial. But Dr. Matthew Pinsker from Dickinson College put together a brief sort of introductory video that we're going to show now. It's about 3 or 4 minutes long. And
let's take a look at it. I love that it's called the Legacy Gallery because it makes it very clear to us that our focus is not just on Lincoln at the theater or Lincoln's death, but it's really talking about him as an influential leader in the nation. Mm-hmm. So the Legacy Gallery. Let's check this clip together.
And this is about 4 minutes.
For education and leadership, and what they call the Legacy Gallery. This is an interesting space for teachers. This is where they're trying to introduce students to the idea that a leader's legacy changes over time, that people can use it for their own purposes. And they do it in 2 ways. They look at images of Lincoln over time, and they look at his words in our hands today. So first, let's talk about images. Lincoln's image in the immediate aftermath of his assassination, in the decades after his death, became one that was in the hands of sculptors and painters who were celebrating his legacy. Some emphasizing his role as the great emancipator, others emphasizing his legacy as savior of the Union. This is something Lincoln might have appreciated. He always, as a politician, cared about his image. He was one of the most photographed men of his era. He sat for paintings. He sat for sculptures. There were life masks taken of him. Lincoln, in fact, had a famous exchange with an 11-year-old girl named Grace Bedell in the middle of the 1860 campaign, where she advised him to grow whiskers because his face was so thin. That's how we get the famous Lincoln beard. Abraham Lincoln cared about his image, and his image mattered to post-war Americans straight through into the 20th century. And what this gallery features, and what it does a powerful job of explaining, is how that famous temple to his image, the Lincoln Memorial, was created and developed in the early 20th century, and how it was dedicated in 1922 with the Gettysburg Address on one wall and the second inaugural on the other as a kind of temple to the American civil religion. But what was fascinating about that moment, what was disturbing in some ways, was that the audience at the dedication was segregated. For a man who had talked about equality and freedom, for a man who had helped destroy slavery, that must have been a disturbing legacy to contemplate. And yet, the people who created that memorial, who thought they were living up to his inspiration, they didn't control the image of the memorial. It changed and evolved over time. People eventually turned it into a platform for civil rights protests. The Lincoln Memorial is one of the great backdrops for the American civil rights movement, and not just for race relations, but for all American protests in the 20th century. It seems that sooner or later, anyone who's lobbying for new rights or more attention to certain key issues, they come before Lincoln and they appeal to the American people. Now, Lincoln's not only a memorial and a statue and an inspiration for rights protesters, he's also sometimes a salesman. His image, as this gallery shows so well, is used in the 19th and 20th century to sell toys. It adorns magazines. It becomes the subject of Hollywood movies. Lincoln's on the penny. He's at Mount Rushmore. He is part and parcel of American popular culture. And that's an important element for students to consider as well. How does the popular celebration of Lincoln, the enduring fascination with Lincoln and his image, what does that say about American culture in general? Now, finally, what I think they do here in this gallery that's as exciting for me as a teacher as anything is they've created something called the unfinished work, a remix of Lincoln's words. It's a video wall of actors and musicians talking about Lincoln's words, using statements from his great speeches, but remixing them into a new collage, something that creates a new experience. This is something any one of us could do. With the technology of the 21st century, we can create a remix of Lincoln's words and make them relevant to us today. This is something our students should feel empowered to do, and what this gallery helps explore and explain as a platform for a renewed thinking about Lincoln's legacy.
It's wonderful. I love that. And one of the things that I'm struck by most when I see that video is the incredible number of primary sources that are there. And I think that you've got a few more for us.
Absolutely. I think next we're going to take a look at a couple of images that were of Washington right around the Civil War.
Look at this. That's a beautiful picture.
Yeah.
Print.
This is a nice bird's eye view of Washington. A lot of what we talk about in our basement museum and also in a lot of our professional development programs is what the city of Washington was like during the Civil War. And we do that to sort of examine Washington as both a strategic capital, but also how it was affected by the war and by Lincoln's presidency. And so I'd like to encourage people to kind of use the chat box right now to just type in a couple of sentences on what you see, what strikes you in this image.
You're such a teacher right now. For the perfect question, what do you notice about
What do you notice first?
Beautiful.
What stands out if you're looking at this map?
So Jake is inviting you now to go ahead and open your chat field and message. What do you see?
And keep in mind that we're looking at both the built environment and the natural environment.
Mm-hmm. Great.
And Jake, just to be clear, this is a Library of Congress photo. Is that right? Is this a...
Yes.
You all have so many partners.
Yeah. Well, the Library of Congress could be your partner, too. I mean, the wonderful thing about the Library of Congress is that if you go to loc.gov, and click on their digital collections, you can find images like this for your classroom, too.
And a visit there is one of the other high points on our WorldStrides DC tours.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Nice.
So some of the things that we're pointing out are obviously the Capitol, sort of to the right of the image. This is actually an image that was created slightly after the Civil War, and if you want to try and guess how we can determine that by looking at the Capitol, just type that in the chat box. I'm sure
Put some challenges out there for us.
I'm sure we'll get some quick answers on that
Check
one.
our times, our date knowledge.
And of course, opposite the Capitol, you can see the unfinished Washington Monument, which I believe someone pointed out. And just north of that would be the White House, sort of a little northwest right there, correct?
With the Treasury on one side. Oh, that's the on the right there.
Yep.
And then the Treasury, it was the War Department and the State Department, I believe, are just to the left, and to the right is Treasury.
Incredible.
And then of course to the right, you can sort of see that if you get a closer look, you see the Smithsonian Castle there. Now, in terms of some of the natural features, it's interesting to note that when you look at the Potomac River right here, it's definitely a lot wider than it is today, especially the area just south of the Washington Monument. That was filled in 1901 under the McMillan Plan, and sort of more parkland was added today where the Lincoln Memorial and things are. It's also interesting to notice the ships that you see, illustrating that Washington was really an active port city. And certainly during the Civil War, these ports would have been transporting large amounts of soldiers into the city. Wounded soldiers would be coming into Washington. There was also another group of people coming into Washington causing the population explosion, and that was people who had formerly been enslaved and were freeing slavery and coming into Washington and living in what were called contraband camps throughout the city.
That's a lot of activity.
Yeah.
It was just a bustling place, and we spend time talking about that just to sort of create the scene of what Lincoln's life in Washington would have been like. He would have seen these soldiers. He would have been aware of all this activity.
And a port certainly represents interaction
Definitely.
between different kinds of people.
Very much.
And I think that he made a conscious effort to sort of distance himself from that at times by living up at his cottage, which is where he spent three summers in the northern part of the city.
I'm struck also by the depth of this image. And what can you tell us about the horizon?
If you look sort of where the land meets the clouds, you can sort of detect a natural ridge. And in fact, there's a ridge that surrounds the city, making the downtown area almost like the bottom of a bowl, where the heat and the humidity and the disease and the filth and the dust would have been concentrated in the summer. So Lincoln goes up to this ridge and spends his summers there. It's also where they built the 68 forts to defend the city, many of which are still here. After the initial Battle of Bull Run, they realized Washington was really in a very precarious place, and so they quickly developed this ring of forts. So there's a lot going on that you can sort of dive into in an image like this, and in the next one as well.
And you know what's interesting, though, is I wonder how someone in the Civil War era could get such a bird's eye view.
Great question.
Good question. There weren't a lot of ways other than being a bird. And in fact, the one way that people were able to get up that high was a military tool. We don't think of it as a military tool today, but those hot air balloons were used for spying and reconnaissance.
A lot of exploration can happen with students from a single image like this.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Talking about social things that are going on. We've got, you mentioned a lot about the building locations and placements, the geographic influence.
The vantage point of the artist or photographer, what are they trying to say with this?
It's a wonderful exercise to use with your students to sort of preload information. When if they're able to travel to Washington, D.C., they already have a working knowledge of its geography just from doing an exercise such as this.
You can anticipate some
things.
Yeah.
Here's another image of downtown Washington.
Look at this.
Around the time of the
It
Civil
doesn't look
War.
like this today.
Not quite.
Some of it might, but what do you notice in an image like this?
Let's use the chat again for this. Let's hear from the teachers with us.
Like your Civil War trivia.
Where are we? What do we see?
What are we seeing? Where are we? Well, I think...
Oh, someone got it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes,
here we are, Ford's Theater.
We're actually looking at Ford's Theater.
And you notice that in this picture, it's the biggest building by far on the
really
block.
is.
And that is not the same experience that you would have if you came here today.
No.
We'll see in a minute.
No, and I think that I really like this image because I think it shows what the rest of the city looked like beyond the few sort of iconic buildings that were under construction, beyond the Capitol and beyond the Washington Monument. This is what downtown looked like. There were dirt streets. You can see horses on the far end. You see, you can imagine these streets when it rained, just sort of mud, and there were no trash cans.
That would be a
People
mess.
threw their trash out front. It was a pretty rough and tumble, unsanitary place.
As I look at that, I think about how construction has changed over time. We've got an outdoor, an exterior stairwell there in the building on the left, and I see some things in the roads that we don't see today.
It's one of our participants wonders whether that's a road sign, and that thing next to it there. What do you suppose that is?
Sarah, tell us, educate us.
I'll tell you. So the sign is actually a sign advertising the businesses. I believe that it advertises the theater and possibly also the business next door to the theater. And then if you look at this thing that's very low to the ground, you can begin to imagine, as Jake was saying, it's so muddy or dusty, depending if it's wet or dry. That was a stand that allowed people to dismount their coaches when they're coming to the theater.
Wow. Yes.
So keep your feet a little bit nicer, keep you from having to leap onto the ground from high up.
Right.
So.
And when Lincoln came to Ford's Theater that fateful night, his carriage would have pulled up to exactly something like that. Of course, we see the theater today. This is the image that we saw at the beginning of the presentation, but you can do a nice compare and contrast.
That's fantastic.
I mean, some things look pretty much the same, and then others look dramatically different. And this is a fun exercise you can do in your own community, wherever you are. Find a historic image from your town, have your students go out, take one, and just really do an in-depth looking exercise of what's there and what's not.
A transferable skill, an exercise that people can do at home.
It's worth noting that the theater, the facade of the theater is original, but the rest of the theater is reconstructed. And that's because in the 1950s, the theater was completely reconstructed to look as it had originally in the 1860s. In the years in between, it served many other purposes, many other purposes. And so, unlike the Petersen House across the street, which is entirely original, the Ford's Theater building, it has been reconstructed to look as it did.
The current renovation is so well done. It's beautiful.
It is beautiful.
And I understand now I want to point out that when people come to the museum now, to the theater now, they actually enter to the left of the theater.
We were able to build a new lobby space because the old lobby, the historic lobby, is really tiny and doesn't accommodate many people at all, not to mention the fact that you used to have to stand outside to get to the box office. There were no restrooms that were handicap accessible. the entire site was really not accessible to people with any mobility issues at all. So we have rectified those situations. You enter just north of the theater and then go into the historic space.
It's really an incredible experience to approach a building that looks very much as it did at that time, and to have all the modern conveniences that help us experience it as well.
The modern bits were put on next door. So we
Of course. Yeah, it's really a meeting of the time. It's great.
Let's take a look at this picture.
Well, central to our story here is, of course, John Wilkes Booth.
Who is this dreamboat?
This is the Brad Pitt of the 1860s. Actually, one of the country's most famous actors, and of course we spend time in our basement museum talking about Booth and his conspirators, and it's interesting to note that really in April of 1865, as the Civil War is coming to an end, Lincoln's been inaugurated, he's given his second inaugural address, and Richmond's been taken. There's April 9th, the surrender at Appomattox Courthouse. As these events are unfolding very quickly, Booth is getting more and more upset and sort of desperate. He originally had come up with a plan to kidnap Lincoln on his commute from the White House to the Soldiers' Home where he spent his summers.
We don't often hear about that.
No, and as these events started to really unfold quickly, he decided that he had to change his plan from kidnapping to assassination.
Oof.
And so he worked with a group of conspirators, like-minded people, and here's photographs of some of the more prominent
Booth
conspirators.
may have been the headliner, but he had a cast and crew.
He had a cast and crew
And
with
look
this
at this
devious
lot.
plot.
That's right. And it's important to remember that they were not that much older than many of the students who come here. Booth was 26. David Harold, who's on the right, on the bottom there, was only 19.
Right.
So this is a young crew for the most part.
Yes, and we're always trying to look for ways to make connections to students' lives and to today. And one of the things that we often talk about is sort of making comparisons between the conspiracy to assassinate President Lincoln and also the attacks of September 11th, 2001, in the sense that both plans were designed and carried out by very, very small groups of people who had the intent to put the maximum amount of damage on the American government as possible. So you can sort of draw parallels between the two events, and ultimately, both caused death and destruction. But you can argue that they were failures because they didn't win their intentions of bringing down the American government.
They did not. Right.
That's right. Well, the intention of this group was to kill the president and the vice president and the secretary of state. And while they did kill Lincoln, the vice president was not killed and the secretary of state was injured but not
survived
killed.
a bad attack. Right.
Wow.
So it was a larger plot than just to kill Lincoln. And we talk about this just so students are aware that it didn't just happen in a vacuum, that one day Lincoln was at the theater and Booth came over and decided to shoot him. It was all part of this very quickly unfolding end of the war and sense of celebration that was happening in Washington, which brought Lincoln to the theater.
The theater and the Center for Education and Leadership really takes us back in time. We're going back 150 years, and we're coming up on the 150th anniversary.
Exactly.
And I'd love for you to share with us a little bit about what you have for this special event.
Well, we are so excited. We're excited, and we're also trying to make sure that we're respectful of the events of the end of the Civil War. The 150th anniversary of the assassination and death of Abraham Lincoln will be taking place in 2015, so not this spring, but the following spring. And April 14th and 15th are going to be very powerful days here, I think. And if you can be here, you can be a part of that. If you can't, we hope that you'll find some ways to tune in. We hope to share a lot
This is our
of it
Save the Date
nationally.
invitation.
That's right.
Right
That's
now.
right.
Okay.
Save the date. Make sure that you are aware of what's going on, because we expect for the events to be pretty powerful. The best way that you can get involved now, if you're really excited and interested in this possibility, is to become a part of the Remembering Lincoln Project. We've got a major grant to to begin to work with institutions and people all around the country and even the world to collect different kinds of responses to the assassination by digitizing them. So we're not looking to actually collect the objects themselves, but to make a digital collection online. And in fact, we're building a teacher advisory group right now that we want to use so that teachers can get a preview of all of this, and also then have teachers try out the website and share their ideas with us, and even partner up with their local historical institutions to do some research of their own into what life was like and what the response was like to the Lincoln assassination in the place where you live.
That sounds like a fantastic way to become part of a network of other educators who have the same interests and who can share resources with you.
Well, and you suddenly get a chance to teach an event that we think of as happening just in one place as it unfolded throughout the country.
Right.
Because it did unfold across the
Everybody was
country
affected.
and around the world. Everyone was affected, and we think of this one moment in Ford's Theater, but it was just one point on a much larger continuum.
So in addition to supporting this teacher advisory group here in Washington, D.C., you really have an opportunity to do something in your local community.
Exactly,
That's
exactly. And we can't wait to connect with as many of you as are interested. The best way to reach us is to email rememberinglincoln@fords.org, and David McKenzie, our digital projects manager, will get back to you and get you on your way to becoming part of this.
I see that address here at the bottom of the screen, and I'm going to type it into our chat for our teachers so that we'll have a live link for you all. That's fantastic. So we really are capturing primary resources, making things available to educators, and working together for education. We've got another opportunity to look at some ways of making the most of primary resources. The WorldStrides education team has partnered with the Ford's Theater team in reviewing some primary sources and creating lesson plans for instructors to use in the classroom. We want to share a couple of those with you today. Our plan is to help you understand how to access the resources through Ford's Theater and then use them in the classroom. So we'll share just some teasers from the lesson plans with the intention of sending you a follow-up email after the webinar that contains the full lesson plan. So we'll just give some bits today and tell you what's coming and take a look. The first lesson plan is called Says Who, and it's points of view from the 1860s. The purpose of this particular lesson has been designed to invite students to explore materials that are related to President Lincoln, to the Civil War, and to several of the many viewpoints of the 1860s. As you all have been saying, there was a lot going on at the time.
People were in conflict, and there wasn't just a two-sided conflict. There were a lot of different opinions.
Yeah, there was a lot going on. So in this exercise, in this lesson, we're asking students to consider various perspectives of the time and then work with Ford's Theater approved materials, your quality resources, that will look at those resources and see how the different groups were informed about the pressing issues of the day. So as we were joking earlier, information was not being passed by text or Twitter. So to look at the other things. Let's see. So the lesson is asking students to first jump in and figure out what they know. As teachers, we understand that we want our students to have a mindset of readiness before we introduce new material to them. And also as teachers, we know that it's helpful to us to know what our students know when we begin a lesson so that we're better prepared to move them forward in their understanding. So we'll activate prior knowledge. Then we're going to follow the lesson plan and work to help students make a connection to a present-day situation. They'll be able to draw some parallels to experiences that they're likely to have in their daily lives and then use that as a framework to understand what was happening in the 1860s. Then we'll introduce new material, basing everything in resources from the Ford's Theater. And of course, because we're educators too, we want to provide you teachers with an assessment that's a good tool for you, so an assessment for learning. We'll help you with your grading, but also you'll be able to use this assessment to put it in the hands of your students so that they can measure their own learning and make sure that they're responsible for reaching learning objectives. Then they can use it for peer-to-peer review.
It's so nice to have the full package.
Absolutely. A real
resource.
lesson plan shouldn't just be an activity that sounds fun.
Right.
It's all of the ingredients.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to just take a peek at how new material is introduced in this particular lesson. In this lesson, you may be familiar with the term raft, role, audience, format, and topic. You invite your students to pick one item from each category, and then that becomes the structure for their particular assignment. So they pick the people, they pick the format, and we've got 5 topics that they can focus on. It allows you to give your students all a similar assignment, but then the students' selections mean that you're going to be able to present a nice range of viewpoints when you share your final product. So that the says who and points of view comes together because of the choices that your students make in this part of the lesson. The part of the lesson plan also includes a grading rubric, which is pictured here, and I mentioned that there are a number of ways that you can use it for yourself and for your students. All of this is just part of what we'll be sending to you in the lesson plan. I get excited sharing teaching resources because I know how much I appreciated receiving them.
Yeah, and that's how it's done.
So we hope that you like these, and we'll look forward to sharing them. Catherine, you've developed a fantastic lesson on Lincoln's leadership.
Yes,
tell us about it.
Yes, thank you. This next assignment is, or lesson plan rather, is one that it tends to take a fresh perspective on the research project and explore Lincoln's legacy of leadership, and something that has become much appreciated throughout time.
Almost every president says they're following it.
That is absolutely true. So true. Just about every single one. And so students have much to learn from that, much as these past presidents have. And they'll be using a transferable skill, so it's really your traditional research model, but they're able to take ownership of the project and choose what they like. It'll be something purposeful and unique to them. And it really bridges the English class and the history class, utilizing skills from both, which of course, yeah, it really supports our Common Core folks. And that, those come in our resource packets too. We've selected some standards of aligned for you, so you can
we're all accountable.
Plug it right in, of course. Okay, so this lesson, of course, asks us first to explore a question, maybe together as a class. The big question is, what made Lincoln such a strong leader, and how can I learn from his legacy?
I like this. Anchored in the historical piece, but then personalized for each student.
Yes, of course. Then after exploring that bigger issue as a class, students will be presented with a list of pieces of advice that sort of spring from these lessons in leadership that Lincoln has offered.
He was a wise man.
Of course. And so
we'll take his advice.
Yes, I think that he's a pretty safe source, I would say. Right. So students, they'll choose a piece of advice that most interests them, and then do an individual research project, which they'll present, and they'll present their analysis and findings in a unique way.
Beautiful. Let's take a look at the advice selection, because this really is where Lincoln's voice comes through.
Of course. So this is just a snapshot of the short list of pieces of advice that we'll offer. Really, the idea here is to allow your students to discover and explore, and it's of course up to you and to your class and your level, to which degree of depth you want your students to go, but we make some suggestions.
What I like most about the way you prepared this lesson plan is that you've provided an opportunity for students to choose within the assignment. So everyone gets the same assignment, same question, but they're so much more invested in their work when they have some choice.
With ownership. And also, if you have the opportunity to have your students present in the projects, we'll talk a little bit more about the form, but if they are able to present to a genuine audience, maybe a principal or another teacher or another class, of course that gives
authenticity.
Gives them some motivation to really revise and dig in. The presentation piece that we talk about in terms of how...
This is what they're producing.
Yes, what they produce, exactly. Once they have done a significant amount of research, they've done some analysis, they are able to then choose, again, in which form they would like to present this. So our reporters in training, I have a few journalists.
We'll send the whole list.
Absolutely.
They'll get the choices with the lesson plan. And just to anchor, you are anchoring this research and resources from the theater too.
Oh, yes, of course.
So,
our students actually, in terms of their research, the lesson plan and the student directions that are included in your packet direct them to the Ford's Theater Explore.
Materials.
Yeah, particularly the Explore Lincoln, if you're familiar with the site. It's a great place for students to get started.
So we know that Ford's Theater has incredible resources, and we enjoyed making sure that they were accessible to teachers and students. We wanted to make it easy for people, so we'll send those out and
Can't
follow
complain
up.
about that.
We want to do a lot for teachers, both of our organizations, and so tell us a little bit about the Civil War Washington Teaching Fellows, an initiative
I'd
that
be
you all
glad
have.
to.
Thanks, Jake.
It's actually very rooted in point of view and in Lincoln's leadership. So we have a summer professional development program, Civil War Washington Teacher Fellows, and we bring 25 teachers from around the country to Washington in July. This summer session is July 13 through 18. And you spend a day at 4 or 5 sites around the city that were very relevant during the Civil War. And the idea is that you get a different perspective on the war from the place that you're in. So you spend a day at Frederick Douglass's house, gaining sort of an insight on Douglass as a leader and also sort of the African-American experience in Washington during the Civil War. You spend a day at Tudor Place, which is a beautiful antebellum mansion in the Georgetown neighborhood of Washington. It was owned by Southern sympathizers, and so when we do our walking tours of Georgetown and explore this beautiful house, you're sort of getting a window into the Confederate perspective in Washington.
Which was a very important part of the Washington community.
Very much in Washington, exactly. Of course, you spend a day at Ford's Theater where we sort of get the downtown perspective.
The highlight.
And we do an evening walk led by an actor who portrays the police captain who was investigating the assassination, and we do all sorts of primary source workshops throughout the day. You see the play Sarah mentioned earlier, One Destiny. And finally, you spend a day at President Lincoln's Cottage, which is on the grounds of the armed old soldiers' home, and that's where they first buried the Union soldiers who had fallen in battle, and then when they ran out of space there, they took over Robert E. Lee's estate, Arlington, and turned that into a national cemetery. So this is where Lincoln went and developed many of his ideas and did a lot of his writings, including where they think he wrote the first draft of the Emancipation.
Jake, I really like this because you're giving teachers an opportunity to be students again. And
Right.
if it's not exactly students, you're at least giving them an opportunity to act out their commitment to being lifelong learners.
Absolutely.
And I think it would be very powerful to be a classroom teacher and to say, I've been here, I
Right.
saw this, I toured this, I interacted. And
teachers have told us that when they've actually had the opportunity to be in the spaces where these things happen and take that knowledge back to their students, that it's had a greater impact on their teaching.
I would at least want to be a teacher able to embed a photograph of myself into my class PowerPoint saying, no, really, I was there.
Yes, that's right.
It's wonderful to have yourself pointing at Ford's Theater.
Yeah.
It's also wonderful to have that opportunity. So often teachers like yourselves work so hard to create these genuine opportunities for students, constantly looking for new ways to immerse them, and it's just how fantastic to do it for yourself.
Yeah, we deserve it. All teachers deserve it.
We'd love to have teachers join us, so the information, of course, is up top, and then we'll include that in the chat box as well.
We have explored some incredible information, but really this is the tip of the iceberg. Ford's Theater is amazing, and the more time I spend here, the more I realize I don't know. And so I'd love to hear some more about other things going on, other resources that are available. This one is Explore Lincoln's Presidency. What is that all about?
Well, on our website, we do have a couple of resources that you can take advantage of right off the bat. And one of them, we mentioned earlier on, there was a link for the virtual tour of the theater, which will allow you to actually see all different parts of the theater without going to be here, without coming here yourself. The Explore Lincoln's Presidency section is largely narrative. It tells the story of the theater through the words of a whole bunch of different really great historians. You can download it as a PDF and use portions of it with your students if you like, or you can use it online. includes a timeline of Lincoln's life. It includes a timeline of the day of April 14th, Booth's Day and Lincoln's Day, and there are a whole bunch of other similar resources and links. And then My Lincoln Video, this we mentioned, Matt Pinsker, Dr. Pinsker mentioned this project in his video.
Mm-hmm.
The unfinished work is an amazing video that's part of our exhibition, tells Abraham Lincoln's words spoken through the voices of regular Americans today. And you can make your own video using the My Lincoln Video resource.
I really like this. We have a lot of students out there with incredible tech skills. Let's put them to work for educational purposes.
Filmmakers. And this is still in testing, as it says here. It's in the early stages, but we really encourage you to participate. And if you have any difficulties, just email us at education@fords.org, because we're still trying to tweak the site. It's a really exciting opportunity. Then if you visit our YouTube channel, you can find more videos of Dr. Pinsker giving a tour of the site. We have a tour given by some of the young people who work with us here in Washington. We have previews of the shows that you might be seeing if you're coming to the theater with your students. There's all kinds of wonderful resources on our YouTube channel. So
I've seen some of the Pinsker, Dr. Pinsker's pieces here, and I would encourage teachers to go ahead and take a look. Just go.
And he's actually just about to film a tour of the other side of the street. He was supposed to do the whole thing, but of course the government shutdown got in the way last October. So he's coming back in March to film the theater and the basement museum.
That's wonderful. Yeah, there's a lot to see. I'm glad he can come back.
Yeah, so we are very excited about that. And then the last thing is that if you're bringing students here, we really encourage you to go to the printable resources section of the education pages, because we have a theater season guide so that you can have materials to prepare students to see whatever show they're seeing, if they're coming to see an actual performance in the evening or a matinee. We have leveled gallery guides. We have other resources beyond those. And these are all things that you can simply download and print out and have available to you as you're preparing your trip. So we really encourage you to consider making use of those. It will really enrich your experience.
The printable resources here and the guides that you're talking about make it easy and comfortable to be a teacher moving even a large group of students to the theater and through the theater. I've been impressed with the staff here and the way they care for groups. I would encourage a teacher to commit to coming and then trusting that you're in good hands. You also have prepared for us a group arrival video. Connie Golding will tell us a little bit about the best practices for bringing a group to Fords, and let's take a look.
Right, Connie's the group sales manager, and she just put together this very, very brief video, sort of what to do when you arrive and where to get your tickets.
Perfect.
Connie Golding, I'm the group sales manager here at Fords Theater. We look forward to having your group come visit us, and I want to give you a few pointers to help make your trip a successful one. All buses should drop off across the street from the theater in the designated bus loading and unloading zone. After your students have safely crossed the street, have them line up outside while a group leader goes inside and pick up their tickets from the box office. Remember, you need your Fords Theater confirmation sheet to pick up your tickets. Distribute your tickets to your students while they are in line, and remind them not to lose their ticket. They will need it later to access the Petersen House. Before entering the site, please take a moment to remind your group of a few things. No food, drinks, or gum are allowed on the historic site, except water. Your safety is important to us. Please, no pushing or running. Please be respectful of the site and to the other visitors by speaking in a low volume. All noise and light devices, including laser pointers, are not permitted and could be confiscated. While attending a feature talk or one Destiny performance in the theater, please be respectful and silence your cell phone. All these guidelines can be found on the backside of your welcome letter, which is included when you pick up your tickets. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to ask a member of our visitor service staff. Thank you, and I hope you enjoy your visit.
Wonderful. That's great. So Connie's demonstrating what I'm talking about. There's just a commitment on the part of the staff to ensure that groups here are in good hands. I am always hopeful that WorldStrides will be the education travel provider for groups coming to Ford's Theater and to other amazing places in Washington, D.C. If I can help you and your students come to D.C., I hope that you'll reach out to WorldStrides through educationtravel.org website down there at the bottom. Let's see. I think it's time for us to offer some thanks to our teachers for joining us for the webinar.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for spending time with us.
Sharing resources is our reason for being.
Absolutely.
That's right.
So I feel confident that we have made some things available today that people didn't know about yesterday.
And there's even more coming in the form of a packet.
Yes, we will be following up by email with some resources. How nice for everybody. Thank you so much. We've got some contact information for you on the screen right now. Let me add a few more things here to the chat box so you have some live links, and we will look forward to being in touch with you in Washington, D.C. at Ford's Theater. Thank you all. Thanks for joining us for the webinar.
Thank you so much.